Hey pop-up camper enthusiast, time for another DIY pop-up camper fix-it project. In this video, I need to replace my countertop around my sink because I accidentally broke a chunk off it. Let me show you what happened and then I'll take you through the process of how I fixed it. Okay, let's take a look at the problem. Here is my sink, my little galley area. I've got a little countertop, my stove is here. There's the sink and the little countertop. Like most, it rotates down, all right? The problem is, when I was rotating it up one time, I didn't have this this bed rail out far enough. There's a lip here, and I caught the corner of the sink right there on that lip and took a chunk off. Tried to shove it back in place. I tried to glue it. It's particle board, so that didn't work. And now water's gotten under there and it's all warped. On top of that, on a different trip, I stuck something hot on my drain plug and melted it, and I haven't really been able to find these again. That wasn't such a showstopper. I could use something else for that, but this is sort of getting to be a problem. So that's what prompted this DIY project. So I looked on YouTube to see if there was anybody who did this, and it seemed like not really. Everybody who replaced their countertops was mostly just beautifying it. They either painted it or they applied contact paper to make it look nice. I can't do that. Contact paper is not going to fix my problem. I got a chunk missing. So I had to do a little research and come up with my own solution. What I found is I have three choices about what material I'm going to replace it with. I could have tried to find a laminate, a press board. I could have used a solid wood, a 3/4 inch ply, or I could use something called MDF. MDF stands for multi-density fiberboard. Medium density fiberboard, not multi-density fiberboard. Oops. And this is MDF. It's kind of what they make your kitchen counters out of, I think. It's a much denser particle board than what's used in these trailers. It is a little bit heavy, heavier than, say, like press board, but it's also a lot more durable, and it's a lot easier to work with because it doesn't shatter all over the place when you try to cut it up. Same with plywood. When you try to cut plywood, it's a grain to it. So when you try to cut things out, you tend to get a lot of, jagged edges, which is really hard. You got to sand that down. This stuff is actually really great. MDF is a little bit cheaper than plywood, and I think they weigh about the same. So I decided to go with the MDF. One thing about MDF is that if it gets wet, it's going to swell just like my particle board did. So I have to make sure that I seal it really well. So my next thing to deal with was how was I going to seal this and what was it going to look like? Again, I couldn't just put contact paper on it, and I didn't want to just paint it because I didn't think that was going to look as nice. I ended up finding online for Home Depot this like countertop kit where you can paint right over the top of an existing countertop and make it look like this kind of Corian beautiful surface. That's what I did. So let me take you through the process of how I did that. I liked it so much, and honestly the kit was kind of expensive and I didn't want to waste it, that I ended up doing everything on my countertop that was flat on the top. I did 4 things, and let me show you what it looks like now. All right, this is what the trailer used to look like. Coming in, you can see my stove off to the left, sits on top of a raised counter. Counter is a laminate with a brown edging. Over there is my sink. We already saw how that's broken up. And then where the dish pans were sitting, this is an old photo, is an area where suitcases or whatever can stay. And then in this photo, the table is folding down, but you can see it's the same laminate with the brown edging that everything else is. Here's what my trailer looks like now after this project. You can see I've done this surface with my stove. I did this surface, which was the original problem, my sink. I did this surface, which is where whatever goes. And then I also did my table. I think that the entire group of 4 together looks nice and clean. It's very durable, and it makes my trailer look nice and fresh. So I think it came out pretty awesome. I would tell you that as a grand summary of this whole thing, I'm very happy with how my project turned out. So let's talk about the cost of this, both time and money. The time for this took about 2 weeks, and that's because this project started from just replace the countertop to, hey, as long as we have this kit that costs this much money, let's do all the surfaces. But since I didn't figure that out until later, I didn't paint all the things at the same time because a lot of these coats have to dry overnight. So if I had just done this all at once, it probably would have taken me about a week. I should also mention that I only used the MDF stuff on my sink and on my table. For the other 2 surfaces where I put my luggage and by the stove, I just painted over the existing laminate. This kit can do that. I was gonna try to replace those pieces. I have the MDF because this big 4x8 sheet certainly is enough. But to get that off seemed like an unnecessary project. Didn't want to do it. Plus, if I did my stove, I was gonna have to unhook my gas lines, which I definitely didn't want to do. So just keep in mind that you don't always have to remove the surface. You can go right over the existing surface. My table wasn't in great shape and clearly my sink wasn't. So those were new pieces. Okay, so that was a time frame based on the way I did it, just waiting for paint to dry. It took me about 2 weeks, probably could have done it in about a week. Let's talk about cost. I'm gonna break it down for you, the things that I needed to buy and the things that, well, you know, once this project grew, I decided to replace some old manky pieces. Let's talk about what I wanted to buy and then the total cost. Okay, first of all, I needed some MDF. I did opt for the 4-foot by 8-foot board, 3/4 inch thick. They did have a smaller hobby size board, but I thought I was gonna do my table, so I went for this one, $59. The smaller piece was like $33, so it wasn't a huge difference. Next came the SpreadStone kit from Home Depot. With tax came to about $160, and that gives us a grand total of $219 for things that I absolutely needed. Now the fun stuff. I decided to replace my sink. I got a new drain, I got a new trap, and I got a new faucet. My extra pieces cost me $112. My grand total for the project was $331. All right, I'm gonna just quick take you through the project so you can see what's involved in this. Wasn't that hard. It really wasn't that hard. The biggest thing was just waiting for the paint to dry. Other than that, this was actually a pretty easy project. All right, the first thing I need to do is take some measurements. What size stuff do I need? And then I marked out my MDF and cut out my table and my sink top. I use my tabletop saw here to go ahead and cut those corners roughly. Then I'll sand those later. I had to remove my water lines. I had to remove my drain. Pulled that guy off. And then I just removed the whole sink because I bought a new trap, so I don't need to take that white thing off. There's just some wing nuts on my old sink that took that off. A bunch of plumber's putty that was kind of gooey. For me, it was really easy. I just had to unscrew a bunch of screws on the outside and my countertop came off, and there it is. I made sure it matched my other counter before I went ahead. Then I added my measurements. You can see my new sink sitting there. Traced around that. Followed the directions for the sink as to how big to cut that hole using my jigsaw. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're not going to see the hole. Made sure everything fit, including the depth. And now I had to sand everything, sand all my edges. I didn't have anything to make those counters more rounded, so I used my sandpaper. Wiped everything down when I was done to get all of the dust off. Okay, here's the kit that got delivered to my door. It was in a much bigger box. I got this through Home Depot. They don't carry the kits in stock. You have to order them. Let's see, there's our polyurethane. Base coat. Some brushes, that's nice. Okay, stone coating. Oh, a little dinged up. Stone coating 2. Oops, step 2. Oh, they're all labeled. Step 1, step 2. That's nice. Okay, and then bubble wrap and sandpaper and instructions. Got 60 sandpaper and 120 sandpaper. And then apply a coat. Oh, wow, this is like paste. Apply a coat over the top of my countertop and let it dry for 30 minutes before applying a second coat. It's pretty thick stuff. Wow. Okay. All right, using the roller, I rolled it on. I do both sides because I don't want water leaking underneath my counter as well. And then once that was done, I mixed up my sparkly stuff really, really well and put 2 coats of that on. Both sides as well. Here's a close-up of what that looks like. You can see it's chunky. Got chunks of stone or whatever in there. It's gonna look pretty. Oops, missed a spot. So I have to let this sit for a couple hours. Probably in this humidity a little longer. We'll put our second coat on. The sandpaper are included. However, the dust mask that's required is not included in the kit. Go figure. So good thing I had one. Let's do this. Time to sand. It does show me sanding by hand. I did end up borrowing an orbital sander. It did a much, much better job. Also, it doesn't look like I've painted the edges on this one because I did go back and paint the other side and the inside to keep things going. Once that was all done, I had to sweep and or vacuum all the dust off this and wipe it clean so it's ready to apply the top coat of the polyurethane. And again, I did do both sides, and this time I was doing just one side that you see here. It was at this point I decided, hey, that went so amazingly well, I'm going to do my stove. But I don't want to pull my stove out. I'm just going to unhook it and turn it sideways. I'm going to go right over the top of my existing stove counter. So I unhooked my stove and I took my stove out, washed up the counter because it was kind of gross after many, many years of being used. I did the exact same process where I taped things off this time though, and then I applied the 2 coats of the base, 2 coats of the sparkly stuff, and 2 coats of the polyurethane, having to wait for everything to dry in between and also do the sanding and the cleaning. Once everything had dried the required 24 hours, I reinstalled the stove, and this is what I got. As for the little area where I put my suitcases, it's the same as the stove. I did not remove the countertop or cut a new piece. I simply went over the top with all the required coats, let it dry, and it looks awesome. For the table, as I said before, I did cut a new MDF piece, rounded the corners, sanded it, did everything. I got a full coat of everything on the tops and sides, and then I ran out of the that primer that's supposed to go under everything. So I did not do the whole spiel on the bottom. I just did a single coat of primer, then I ran out, and then I added just some regular like house paint, wall paint that I had, just to make sure that it would seal it up and moisture would not get into that MDF. The final step was to transfer the legs over. I did not have to buy new legs. Okay, so I am very happy with how my trailer turned out. Got rid of that pesky little smashed up counter problem, freshened up everything else, and I think the trailer looks awesome. Can't wait to take my trailer camping again, to use my new surfaces. Very excited. So I hope this inspired you to do any work you need to do on your trailer, and happy camping.